The village of Pillsbury is in Derbyshire, overlooking the River Dove, and is what experts call a shrunken medieval village. To the rest of us, a hamlet. Pilsbury Castle occupied an area of high ground approximately 160 by 137 metres overlooking the River Dove, near the village of Pillsbury. The castle was probably originally an Iron Age fortification before being used by the Normans, and the name Pilsbury Castle forms from the Celtic pill, the Saxon bury, and the Norman castle, all meaning fortified site. In early medieval times, the site would have been located along the River Dove routeway and would also have overlooked a key crossing point. The Normans built a substantial Motte and Bailey castle on the site, and several theories have been put forward as to when and who did so. One theory is that the castle was built in the years following the Norman conquest of England. The area around Pillsbury was granted to Henry de Ferrers by King William. The area was devastated during the harrying of the north between 1069 and 1070, and the castle may have been built in the aftermath by Henry to establish control. Henry built other castles at Tutbury and Duffield, making Pillsbury part of his set of 11th century fortifications. The idea is that the Normans, having destroyed people's homes and livelihoods, found themselves in a situation where those Saxons who survived took to the hills and turned to outlawry in order to survive. If this was the case, it then follows that the Norman landowners had to build defences to keep the Saxons firmly under control, especially somewhere like Pillsbury, which stands near a ford and a packhorse route and is in terrain ideal for fugitives. It's not hard to imagine the dangers of an attack in this isolated spot. There is a problem with this though, as elsewhere in the country. Hartington and Dove Valley were in the hands of the de Ferrers family. It is unlikely that William the Conqueror would rampage with fire, sword and salt across lands belonging to powerful favourites, as a yield from those lands would fall rather drastically, as a result making their acquisition somewhat pointless. The same may be said of landholdings notably in Yorkshire belonging to Alan the Red, for example. So if that theory doesn't appeal, how about the Normans turfing hard-working Saxons off their lands in order to create a wilderness where they could hunt? The disposed Saxons may well have been taken to the hills and caves in the Dove Valley, again turning to outlawry just to survive. Alternatively, maybe the de Ferrers simply wanted to stamp their authority on their land with one of those newfangled castles, just to remind the locals who was in charge, or to extract tax as packhorses laden with salt and other goods crossed the ford. An alternative suggestion is that it was built by Robert de Ferrers or his father during the period known as the Anarchy. For while the de Ferrers supported Stephen of England, the neighbouring Earl of Chester supported Empress Matilda. King Stephen and Empress Matilda were slogging it out to see who would rule England. The River Dove marks a boundary between lands belonging to the Earl of Derby and lands belonging to the Earl of Chester. So let's just say that between 1135 and 1153, the pair were not the best of friends, with the Earl of Derby backing Stephen and the Earl of Chester backing Matilda. Under those circumstances, with a ford just down the valley, a fortification becomes rather a sensible idea. Actually, come to think of it, the two earls weren't terribly friendly at other times in history, so the castle may simply have been built as part of a neighbourly dispute. The written record after its construction is somewhat vague too. Pillsbury is mentioned in the Domesday Book, but not the castle. Pillsbury is mentioned again in 1262, again the land and not the castle, and when the Earl of Derby, Robert de Ferrers, granted land to Henry of Shelford. 4 years later, the Earl of Derby was up to his neck in rebellion and his land was promptly confiscated. By the 13th century, the land on both sides of the river was in the hands of the Duchy of Lancaster, so there was no need for a defensive structure. So as far as Pillsbury Castle is concerned, it is possible that the castle was used as a hunting lodge during later times, but it ceased to be a centre of administration after Hartington received its market charter in 1203 from King John. The castle itself includes a Motte and Bailey enclosures, approximately 40 metres by 45 metres across respectively. It had timber defences, ditches and additional flanking earthworks, and the castle appears to have been abandoned in subsequent years. It may be that it was destroyed after William de Ferrers' part in the revolt of 1173-74, or it might have been abandoned when the land passed to the Duchy of Lancaster after the 6th Earl was dispossessed. Alternatively, it may simply have become redundant as nearby Hartington grew in importance and the village of Pillsbury became increasingly depopulated. By the 20th century there was little to see except for a mound and a limestone crop and the remains of various earthworks. At the beginning of the present century, however, archaeological surveys revealed the foundations of a castle, and the site is a scheduled ancient monument.